When you find yourself deep in suffering, slow down and just watch. Watch the suffering arise. Watch the resistance come and go. And by doing this, you create space between yourself and the thing that you observe. The reason we suffer so much is because we identify with our suffering. As the Buddha once said in the parable of the two arrows, the first arrow comes from the pain of being in a body. It's the inevitable pain of being alive. But the second arrow is the suffering that we inflict upon ourselves through our reaction to the first. And so if you are experiencing pain, if you feel like you are going crazy, if life is not going the way you want it to, take your identification away from the one who suffers, because that is what is causing all the trouble. And we do this by being aware, by remaining as awareness and observing. Because that which you observe can never be you. Because then who is there to observe? Who is observing that thing? And that is what is self-inquiry. When you suffer, you ask who is the one who suffers. And throughout our daily lives, what you will find is that the mind is continuously trying to hypnotize us back into identifying with the body, with the mind, with the world, with our suffering, with our problems, with our life circumstances. And that is why we become slaves. Slaves to the body, slaves to the mind. It is through our belief. And you have the power to take that belief away. But see that you do not actually have to do anything, because you are already aware naturally. And only when we give something our belief, our attention, do we feed it our energy. Think of the difference between saying, I am in pain versus there is pain. I am suffering versus there is suffering. I am in resistance versus there is resistance. Without your belief, without your identity, the story you are living in has no power over you, and you become free. But when you are caught in the story, that is where all the misery and suffering comes from. Because if you think about it, if life isn't going well for you, and you say, my life isn't going well, well then you are stuck. But if you just observe, if you just remain as awareness, there is no story. There is just changing experiences. And what happens is that all of the negative experiences that we go through no longer have the same meaning, because you have neutralized all negative experiences, and therefore have neutralized the suffering that those negative experiences bring with them. And all you have to do is watch your thoughts, watch your reactions, watch your experiences. What you find is that there are only two things that ever exist from the moment you are born until the moment you die. And that is, there is an infinite array of changing experiences upon the backdrop of an unchanging awareness. And you are that. You are the unchanging. And everything else is your experience. But we suffer because we identify with our experiences. We identify with the temporary, and we identify with the changing. And so when things change, we suffer, because change is death. But the unchanging, that is eternal life. And so focus not on the things of the world. Focus not on your thoughts, but be aware of the unchanging awareness that you are. Turn your focus in on itself and see yourself. Look in the mirror, perhaps for the first time, because what we are all searching in this life is ourselves. And whether you see it now, or a decade from now, or however long, at some point in your life, you will feel a lack even if you have the whole world, something will be missing. And that thing is yourself. Because you cannot find lasting satisfaction in a temporary world, so you will always need more. You will always need to have another goal, another dream, something to continue striving for. But when you find the eternal, the unchanging within you, that is you, well then, you can have lasting satisfaction. You can find everlasting peace. And I say, from this place of peace and freedom, live your life. But if you live your life without this freedom, then that is not truly living. Because one cannot help but being a slave to forces outside of their control. And if you live a life that is not of your own choosing, that is not living. But you can choose what you react to. You can choose which thoughts to feed. You can choose which things to give your energy. And when you find yourself feeding what is negative, you can stop and be aware of that. And in that awareness, you cut off the momentum and you take your power back. And every time you take your power back, the forces of negativity lose their power over you. And so it does not matter what happens to you. It matters how you react. If you learn to take something that is negative and turn it into positivity, you become unstoppable. Because whatever happens to you, you will use it for your highest growth. And so whenever you lose, you win. Whenever you fail, you really succeed. Because in the darkness, in the low moments, that is where all the wisdom is found. But if you are so caught up in the identity of the one who suffers, you become blind to the message, you become blind to the wisdom, and you wallow in suffering and misery. Because you cannot have clarity and be attached at the same time. I say, if you have a strong attachment to something, if something really gets you emotional, then you have to say, my perception has been corrupted. Because you are not seeing reality clearly. You are seeing reality through a temporary emotional lens. And so all the data has to be thrown out until you get your mind right. And then you see once again. You see without the emotional attachment. And that is clarity. When something bad happens and you do not react, the message is clear. And you can learn almost instantly. And so you no longer have to be dragged along through these negative experiences because you are no longer adding your psychological nonsense onto them. Because the first arrow is inevitable, but the second arrow is optional. And what you find is that most of the suffering we experience is our own selves dragging ourselves through misery. That when you take your identity away, your reactions, your beliefs, and you just see how reality is unfolding before you, what you find is that the effects of karma begin to dissipate. And what this means is that you are no longer creating very much consequences in your life. Whereas before, one action might affect you days, weeks, months, years into the future. But now, from this place of true seeing, that same action might evaporate within hours or within a day, or have no effect over you whatsoever. Because what happens is that when we react to something, we give it a charge. It can be a negative charge, it can be a positive charge, but whatever it is, it makes an imprint onto our mind, and that imprint affects the way we feel, especially if it is something negative that we are reacting to. So we have a negative thought, we have a negative emotion, and this negative emotion influences our actions in a negative way. So it's not just that one bad thing happens to us, it's that we continue to feed the bad things and create more bad things. But if something bad happens to you and you do not react, you do not feed the negativity, well then it makes no imprint on your mind, it does not affect you emotionally, and it does not affect your actions. And you will know that this is true when you come to your true place as the awareness and remain here. Because when you remain as awareness, you stop feeding all identities. And where there is no identity, there is no karma. But of course, in this human body, we cannot necessarily eliminate all karma, but you slow things down to the point in which they are generally irrelevant. And what that means is that you are no longer creating misery for yourself, even if you think you made a mistake. Even if you think you've done something wrong, it does not need to be wrong. Do you think that you can commit any action or think any thought that is apart from the awareness of God? Do you not assume that God has already predicted your every move? And that God would not allow you to be where you are if there wasn't a specific purpose? But you cannot become aware of that purpose if you are entangled in the drama. You cannot see clearly if you are being bombarded by the storm. But only if you are the eye in the storm is there clarity. And so give up the psychological nonsense, the fear, the shame, the guilt, the idea that you are a sinner, because all of these things feed this individual identity. And the individual feeds the story, and the story enslaves you. But know that you have the power to just observe and nothing else. And not only do you have this power, but it is your most natural state. Because as I said, does it take any effort to be aware as you are right now? Of course not. And so this is your default state. But we have spent a lifetime of conditioning, feeding the mind, feeding these stories and beliefs and identities. And so therefore the struggle comes in remembering, in falling into illusion, and then remembering the truth. And seeing, you see yourself get caught up in the drama, and then you recognize who is the one seeing. And in that recognition, you automatically detach yourself from the one who suffers. Because awareness is transcendent. It does not suffer. It does not have problems. It is forever and eternally free for the rest of your existence. And if you recognize this one thing, that you are already free, that you are transcendent, that you are the awareness and not the mind and the body, then no negative experience can ever really have much power over you ever again. Even if you go through struggles and problems and things you do not want, you will flow through these things with grace, because you are no longer cutting yourself off from the flow of life, but you can remain present and watch your life unfold. And this is like allowing God to work through you. Even if you make mistakes, even if you think you do the wrong things, that is still God working through you. When you remain as awareness, you stop resisting life. And when you stop resisting life, life can flow freely. And when life flows freely, you are no longer suffering and struggling and striving all the time. Things unfold naturally, even if you watch as your physical body, the character you are playing, is going through something difficult. You can watch them go through something difficult, but to you it is not difficult. Only when we get pulled back into identification do we feel this is difficult. And it's not that difficulty doesn't arise, it's that you don't identify with it anymore. You take your identity away from the one who struggles, and therefore struggling ceases to exist. Because if there is no one who struggles, then how can struggling be? And so do not allow the mind to continue tricking you into feeding it. Feeding the stories, feeding the drama, feeding the identity, feeding the judgment, because these things keep you a slave. And it's not that you have to throw away your character, throw away all your roles. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying you can play your role to the best of your ability when you are not attached to it, when you are free. How could you play your role better as a slave than when you are free? So watch as the mind tries to trick you. Watch as you get pulled into the illusion of separation. Watch as suffering arises, and watch as suffering goes away. Because all experiences arise and fall within the unchanging awareness that you are. And when you recognize this, You are free.